with Cambridge University Press. Illustrated philosophical tale, The Adventure of the Man in Gold, which is based on his work in performance art. He has directed 2 projects for UNESCO and received honorary doctorates from University of Aalborg and Szeged. The French government awarded him with the title of Chevalier dans l'Ordre des Palmes Académiques for his philosophical and cultural work. His new book with Cambridge University Press, Ars Erotica, Sex and Soma Aesthetics in the Classical Arts of Love, is scheduled to appear in January 2021. Richard Shusterman, it's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you. We are in different places in the world. On my side, I'm in Singapore, as you know. On your side, you are in Florida. Most of the students are in Europe. The floor is yours. As you know, as we discussed for about 40 minutes, then we're going to open the floor to the students. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, Xavier. And thank you, students, wherever you are. I have a very long PowerPoint. I won't finish it all. I will stick to 40 minutes. And I will start right away. The title is Somasthetics and the Art of Living, Practicing Philosophy as Performance with the Man in Gold. And so the first slide is, what is somasthetics? It's a new interdisciplinary field whose roots are in philosophical theory. And what it does is offer an integrating conceptual framework and a menu of methodologies for understanding our somatic experience, but also for improving it. I mean, a big part of somasthetics is the ameliorative dimension, the idea of improving the functioning and pleasures of our soma. And as you'll see in the slides that follow, the soma is the living, perceiving, sentient, purposive body, not simply the body as a machine or a hunk of flesh. So here's a short definition of somasthetics. It's an interdisciplinary research project devoted to the critical study and, again, ameliorative cultivation of the experience and use of the living body, or soma, as a site of sensory appreciation, aesthesis, and creative self-stylization. So I can explain this, these ideas. It has the issue of the soma has 2 dimensions. First, the soma as a perceiving subjectivity. We perceive and understand the world through our body, the body as a perceiving entity that has habits of perception and skills of perception, has all our senses. But the other part of the somasthetics is the body as a material on which we write or express our values. So that's the second part of the definition of the creative self-stylization. We express our values, our group identity, our personal style through the way we express ourselves bodily, through our clothes, our fashion, our hairstyle, our tattoos, if we have them. So somasthetics deals with both the body as a subject, a subjectivity, and the body as an object where people can see who we are and how we express ourselves as subjects. So this is further emphasizing, I'll move quickly through this slide because I've already talked about it. And I think you'll see a lot of Asian images in this presentation because part of it I originally did for the art museum in Seoul, Korea. So here you have several images of some of the translations of my book, Body Consciousness. And again, the general aim of somasthetics is improving our somatic experience, which is not just the physical experience of the body, but the understanding of the body-mind and the appreciation of our being in the world. And what that can also lead to is in terms of improving the social dimension of our lives and the ecological dimension, with a greater appreciation and understanding of how we are situated in a world or an environment. We can care more for the people in that environment and also for the physical environment, the ecological environment. So the somaesthetic idea of cultivating the soma is not a selfish thing. It's a means for improving the world around us, because the soma doesn't exist as an isolated atom or monad. The soma is a transaction of the individual with his or her environment, both the social environment and the physical environment. So somaesthetics is rooted in philosophy, but it's an interdisciplinary field. In fact, one of the most active dimensions of somaesthetics today is in the field of human-computer interaction. So how did somaesthetics come to be? It came to be because I felt that in academic research, there were two gaps, two empty spaces that needed to be filled. There were a lot of discussions about particular areas about body experience and the social meaning of embodiment. But there never was a general framework that could integrate all the different discourses about the body, from bodybuilding and dieting to metaphysical theories of the relationship between body and mind. So somaesthetics does provide that kind of integrating framework. The other thing that I found missing in academic research on the body was something active and practical, something that individuals and groups can do to improve their bodily experience. Most of the academic work was just very theoretical and descriptive, whereas I saw a need also in academic work to actually introduce practical exercises and disciplines of improvement. So these are some of the values of somaesthetics beyond the needs of academic discourse. Improving your bodily senses improves your action and your performance. There are better ways of getting pleasure and more varied if you know how to cultivate your different bodily senses. You can, as I said before, have a better perception of the environment, and you can interact better with people with greater awareness of what your soma is doing. In different countries, there are different degrees of acceptable social distance. For instance, in Brazil, people are much closer to you than they are in Finland. And you can't, knowing what distance to take from a person, it's not enough to know it factually. You have to know where your body is and feel the energy of the other person, who may step back because you come too close, or may come closer because you're too far away. So all these aspects of social interaction through the body are very important in establishing good personal relations with people. And those of you who are in business, making clients or fellow workers feel at ease with you, that's a very important part of the business enterprise. It's the important part of any enterprise that has to do with social interaction. So the genealogy of somaesthetics, where does it come from? Somaesthetics comes from two research areas that were earlier in my career. The first is pragmatist aesthetics, And for those of you who are Francophone, that book was published in France under a different title, published by Minuit as L'art à l'état vif. And the second area of research that led me to somaesthetics was the idea of philosophy as an art of living. And that's in a book called Practicing Philosophy. The French translation is Vivre la philosophie. And the idea with pragmatist aesthetics is that pragmatist aesthetics is an aesthetics that wants to improve, not just to describe our appreciation of art and the creation of art. And the idea is, how it brings me to somaesthetics, is that you cannot make a work of art without using your body. And so everything else being equal, if you have more somatic bodily capacities, you can create more art and better art. Assuming that your talents and your ideas are all the same, you can create better if you have better mastery of your body, which creates the work of art. So you can take an example from a musician who doesn't have good posture and doesn't stand in the right way to play the saxophone or some other kind of instrument. That musician cannot practice as long as he or she could if she had a better posture and a better way of handling the instrument. The same thing goes for a violin, and the same thing goes actually for a DJ who's spinning records. I actually had a client who was a DJ who had a problem with his elbow. Xavier didn't mention it, but besides being a philosophy professor, I'm also a somatic therapist. And so I've treated a lot of people, and my practical work as a somatic therapist has nourished my theoretical research in somaesthetics. So the idea is, from pragmatist aesthetics to somaesthetics, the direction was, since our bodies are essential to creating works of art, we can create better through a better mastery of our bodies. But the other point from pragmatist aesthetics is that to appreciate art, our experience of art as an observer also depends on our bodies. It depends on our senses. It depends, in order to walk through, appreciate architecture, it's not enough to see. You want to walk through the rooms. It's the same thing with installation art. Even to read, we need to use our eyes. And the idea is that we need our bodies also to appreciate art. And so again, the idea is through better mastery of our somatic capacities, we can both create better art and appreciate better art. Now, I have a slide on somaesthetics versus phenomenology. I can go back to it if there's time with questions, but I just want to move forward because I only have another 20 minutes. So the other source or root that brought me to somaesthetics was an ancient idea of philosophy, not as a university discipline, but as an art of living. You know, Socrates didn't teach in the university. There was no university. The first academy was established by Plato, but basically in ancient times, philosophy was not an academic discipline, it was a discipline of living. There were philosophers, including Socrates, who never wrote a book or an article. The idea was philosophy was the love of wisdom, and where you seek wisdom and where you express your wisdom is in your lives. So if philosophy is an art of living, where do we live? How do we live? The only way we live in this world is through our bodily existence. And so if we take philosophy as an art of living, then we should take the body seriously as the medium through which we live our lives. So the images here is Socrates on his deathbed taking the hemlock. He established philosophy not through his writings, because he never wrote anything, but through his example of living a very admirable life, a very noble and courageous life, and dying for the sake of his belief in philosophy. That martyrdom was something that he did through his life that proved the value of his life through his self-sacrifice. So that's philosophy as a way of life through dying. And the other image here, those of you who live in Paris will know it. It's the statue of Montaigne. It's near Place Cluny. And Montaigne was someone who admired Socrates, but he also said, philosophy is not only about dying, we have to also focus on our living. And we live through our bodies. So this is a slide about somesthetics and the traditional aims of philosophy: knowledge, self-knowledge, virtue, happiness, justice. Our bodies connect with all these values and all these aims and goals of philosophy. And again, if you have questions, I can answer them later. I want to move on also to the man in gold. So somesthetics, as I describe it, it's a new name for old ways of thinking. The ideas that inspired somesthetics have existed for thousands of years. It's just somesthetics is a conceptual framework and a kind of orientation to put those ideas together. Now, the name somesthetics comes from two Greek words. The first is aesthesis. That's where we get our word aesthetics from. Aesthetics, most people understand it as what has to do with art and beauty, but actually the root of aesthetics is from sensory perception. And so we know this still in our language from medicine, where you take an anesthetic is something that puts people to sleep before an operation, and anesthetic means no perception because no consciousness. Soma is also a Greek word, and aesthetics as a discipline came from Alexander Baumgarten in the 18th century. And soma is a Greek word, and I wanted for this discipline of somesthetics, I didn't want to call it body aesthetics, because body aesthetics would sound like it's only for top models and bodybuilders. And soma was a neutral word. And in the Asian traditions, which has also been an inspiration for me in somesthetics, I've spent time in Zen training in Japan, and I have a very active life in China, although I haven't been there since the virus. And what's interesting is that in the Chinese tradition, their word for the human body, shenti, Shen in the traditional Confucian tradition isn't simply the body as a piece of flesh, it's the person. It's the same word as person. Shen means both person and body. And actually, you know, we still have a trace of that in English when we talk about somebody, everybody. Somebody means some person. Everybody means every person. So this is also a source of my work in somesthetics, the East Asian traditions. So Soma aesthetics, in a way, was a solution to a double design problem that I had. I wanted to talk about the aesthetics of the body, but I didn't want to use the term body because what I understood of the body is not simply a piece of flesh or a machine, but a subjectivity, a sentient, perceptive subjectivity. And so I needed a different word because body had bad connotations. Body is contrasted with mind. It can be just a dead body. Merleau-Ponty, the great French phenomenologist, used a different term. He described it as flesh, but flesh, chair, was also something that has bad connotations. In the Catholic tradition or general Christian tradition with St. Paul, the flesh is something that automatically sinful. And anyhow, flesh only talks about the meat of the body. Flesh is different from bone and neurons and brain matter. So I wanted a general neutral term, so I took the term soma. The other design issue I had was how to write aesthetics. Xavier told you that I studied in Jerusalem and Oxford. And so my English was British English. And in British English, you write aesthetics with the diphthong AE. But in America, especially the pragmatist philosophers, they didn't use the A in aesthetics because you don't pronounce the A. In fact, they write aesthetics just with an E, the way it's written in Italian, estetica, in French, esthétique. And so I had this question in coming to be an American academic, how should I write aesthetics? It's more practical and actually ecological not to use the A because it's shorter, it's unnecessary, and so it saves paper and ink. But I thought the diphthong is more attractive. And so each time I would have to write aesthetics, I didn't know which way I should write it. I thought logically I should leave out the A, but aesthetically the A looks nicer. So here you can see actually an artwork which shows this question, E or AE. And what's good about, I had this dilemma of beauty versus efficiency. And what's good is that Soma aesthetics was a solution for me. Because in Soma aesthetics, the A now has a semantic function. Okay, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. And those of you who are interested in following it in more detail, you can find this information in Body Consciousness. It's translated into French, Conscience du Corps. It's translated into Chinese and Italian, in many languages, Conscience du Corps, Body Consciousness. So these are the three dimensions of Soma aesthetics. One of them is analytic, that's theory and description. Pragmatic Soma aesthetics is about methods of improvement. It can be like diet, it can be bodybuilding, it can be how you improve your vision or your walking or your triathlon running. These are methods of a somatic improvement, but also pragmatic Soma aesthetics includes debates about the values that are implied in those methods of improvement. So let's say you're doing bodybuilding. Well, that implies a value that it's very important, the actual shape of your body. And certain diets that want to make you thinner, that implies the value that it's very good to have a thin body. Processes and methods of tattooing, that implies that it's good to ornament your body in that way. So that's a second whole branch of Soma aesthetics. The third branch is practical Soma aesthetics, and that's actually doing those body disciplines. So there's a difference between writing about yoga and reading about yoga, the different methods, but there's also just doing the yoga. That's the difference between pragmatic somesthetics and practical somesthetics. Pragmatic somesthetics is about methods of somatic improvement and their comparative critique. Practical somesthetics is actually doing the body work. And so when I teach somesthetics, and I've done it in many places in the world, I don't only give lectures like this, I actually give practical workshops. So besides those three branches, there are three dimensions. There's representational somesthetics, that has to do with the body's external form. Those are practices like cosmetics, hairstyling, cosmetic surgery. Then there's the dimension, the experiential dimension. That focuses on the inner quality of your body experience and things like yoga or Zen meditation. And then there's performative somesthetics that focus on your performance. And I can give a example. Let's say in tennis, the stroke in hitting a ball in tennis. You can admire a good tennis player's stroke in hitting the ball in terms of its representation, how graceful and smooth it looks. The tennis player who's hitting the ball can appreciate the experience of that movement. We all can feel when we make a movement that's graceful or make a movement that's awkward. So the tennis player who hits the ball in a very nice way, that can give him an experiential satisfaction. That's the experiential dimension of somesthetics. But then there's the question of whether the ball goes to the right place and scores a point for the tennis player. It could be a beautiful stroke in terms of the way it looks. It can feel very good, but if it goes into the net, its performative value is not good. And so these are the three dimensions of somesthetics, and most practices involve a combination of those three dimensions. There are other ways that we can describe the practices of somesthetics, whether they're atomistic with particular body parts or holistic, whether they're self-directed, like Tai Chi, where you do it yourself, or, you can do it with other people, but it's independent, you do it as yourself, or practices that you do on other people. So like a surgeon doesn't do his operation on himself, he does it on someone else. And then some activities are reciprocal. So all kinds of practices you can make up, you can do to yourself, or you can do to someone else. So this is a diagram of the three branches: pragmatic, analytic, and practical. And then this is a diagram of the three dimensions. And then there's a diagram that has the three branches and the three dimensions all together. And to explain all the reciprocal influences would take me a very long time, and I have just 15 minutes. So this is an example of one of the practical somesthetics workshops, and it's a workshop in experiential somesthetics, where I guide people to have better understanding of what's going on experientially inside their body, and to feel different parts of their body that they normally don't feel and perhaps have never really consciously been aware of. For instance, most people aren't aware of the different vertebrae. They're thoracic vertebrae. Those are the vertebrae in your back, in the middle of your back. Most people are aware of the lower back, many of them because they have back pain, or of the upper vertebra, the cervical vertebra, which are in the back of your neck. But a lot of people don't feel the thoracic vertebra, all of them. And sometimes through these workshops, people get this great discovery. It's very exciting for them, of new parts of the body that they've always had, but they've never felt before. So, I mean, this is a workshop. I gave this in Royaumont. Yeah, normally I think there's a video with it, but we don't have time anyhow. And Somesthetics, I said, is interdisciplinary, and there have been applications in many fields, in the arts, in health and fitness, which is understandable, in education, and in socio-political issues such as racism, sexism, and ethnic hatred. I mean, a lot of the roots of racism come from people not feeling comfortable with the bodies of other races. And that discomfort can be from the way those bodies look. It can also be from the ways those bodies smell, because different ethnicities eat different foods, and those different foods can cause different smells. I mean, a very clear example for me that I've experienced a few times is the difference between South Korea and Japan. In South Korea, they eat a lot of garlic. In Japan, they don't eat garlic. And so I remember once flying from Seoul to Osaka airport, and then taking 2 trains to visit Japanese friends of mine. And when I reached the little town where they lived between Kyoto and Osaka, my friend greeted me by saying, "You smell like a Korean." And it wasn't a compliment. I had breakfast in Korea. There was a lot of garlic, and then the garlic just comes through your skin gradually. So a lot of the prejudice that we have with different races and different ethnicities comes from uncomfortable feelings that we feel in our body, but we're not aware what's causing them. And so we have this general attitude of discomfort towards people of that group. And that discomfort creates a de facto prejudice and discrimination, so that even if we agree in principle that all races and all ethnicities are equal and welcome, and in principle we're happy with all, in our actual behavior, we still display reticence and reluctance, and perhaps actual discrimination against those different ethnicities and races. And it's the same thing with homophobia and other sorts of things. Behavior that makes us feel uncomfortable, a way of walking, a way of talking, a way of looking. And because we're not aware of what it is that disturbs us, we just generalize on the group of those bodies that disturb us. Okay, now I make a transition to The Man in Gold. And again, this book is available in English and French. The first edition was in French and English, but there's a second edition now only in French, en poche, and it's also available in Chinese. So many art students in Paris, but in other places in Europe, they always ask me, what's the relationship between somesthetics and contemporary art? And I could explain them in a theoretical, general way. But art students, it's surprising maybe to business students, but art students are very practical. They wanted a concrete example of somesthetics in contemporary art. And so when I had the opportunity to give them a concrete example, I did, and that is with an artist in Paris called Jan Thomas. And together we have a project about where I do performance art as the Man in Gold. And so this is the edition of the first book. This is the first edition, And this is the Chinese edition. And there's also a second French edition. And so this is The Man in Gold. And why I thought it's worth bringing The Man in Gold into this lecture is because it's Imagination Week, and it's about ways of life. And normally one understands the philosopher's way of life in contemporary times as a rat de bibliothèque, a library rat, someone who just sits in the library and reads books and then goes home and writes books and maybe goes to a lecture, maybe gives a lecture, but nothing very exciting, nothing very embodied. And so The Man in Gold allowed me, enabled me to have a new direction of imagination. I never imagined, I was 60 years old when Jan first approached me. I knew Jan because he knew my work as a philosopher of art. Jan, besides being an artist, he's an art professor at the Sorbonne, and I was actually on his jury d'habilitation. And so he knew I was interested in experience. He knew from my work on rap music in the late 80s and early 90s that I wasn't a completely boring conventional philosopher. And so he thought I would be willing to put on the costume of the Man in Gold, which is a costume from the ballet of the Paris Opera. Jan's parents were both dancers in the Paris Opera Ballet. And this combinaison bodysuit is one of these dance costumes. I never thought that I could get my middle-aged or old body into a costume made for a young dancer, but I did. And then we did this kind of initially photography art where Jan, his goal was to trace my aura of energy. So the way this happens, the way you get this image is that it's completely dark at night. Either at night we do it or in a darkened room. And Jan puts the camera on a tripod, sets it to a very long exposure. I strike a pose, and then he comes towards me with a lamp, a little lamp, or two lamps, and he traces my energy moving quickly, and then he goes back and closes the shutter of the camera. And so what you see is just the light and my pose, and you don't really see him tracing the light. But if you look closely, you can see his shadow. There will be on the side. So we did this in the beautiful Abbey of Royaumont for long days and long nights. Here is one time where I fell asleep. And so instead of tracing my body, because Jan didn't want to disturb me, he ascended to the conceptual level. And instead of tracing my body's energy, he wrote the word soma, which is the key word in Soma aesthetics. After long day and long night of posing in the dark room, I didn't want to be in the room anymore. Xavier told you that I live in South Florida. It's for a reason. I like the sun and I like movement. So here is the Man in Gold trying to get out of the dark dungeon in the old Royaumont Abbey. And then I did get out. I ran out. I couldn't stand being inside anymore. And Jan was very surprised, but he's a clever man and a good artist. And so he just came after me with a movie camera. he left his ordinary photo camera in the dark room, and he followed me. And what happened was the invention of a new genre of our work in art, and that's actually the work of performance. He followed me and filmed my activities as the man in gold when I ran outside from the Abbey. Here you see the Abbey wall. Here's the garden of the Abbey. It was in the middle of June, beautiful sunshine. Royaumont is in the Val d'Oise. It's like around 40, 50 kilometers outside of Paris. And here I am walking in the cloister, and already this doubling of the image shows that a new individual was born. No longer the philosopher Richard Shusterman, but l'homme en or. L'homme en or is the man in gold, but Jan didn't give me that name, nor did I give the name to myself. The name was given by the owner of the Abbey, Marie-Christine Daudy. She's the woman with the white shirt on the left. And what happened, Jan and I were guests at the Abbey for the weekend because Jan was going to make a fountain in the central square of the Abbey. And so we were invited that day for lunch. But because I ran out of the photo room and ran around the grounds of the Abbey, talking with the visitors, the tourists who visit the Abbey, we were already very, very late for the lunch. Other people were also invited. And so Jan told me, we don't have time to go back to the dark camera room to get my normal clothes. Just come to the lunch like that. And so when I arrived, the owner of the Abbey, Marie-Christine Daudy, she just cried out l'homme en or. And so that is how l'homme en or got his name. And since then, this was in 2010, since then, Jan and I have been doing these performances throughout the world. This is in Paris, an art show to commemorate the 20th anniversary of my book, L'art à l'état vif. And here I am in a Paris street because part of my idea of pragmatist aesthetics is bringing art out of the gallery and the museum and bringing it into life, bringing, in terms of this week's theme, more imagination into life. And so this is, the man in gold is loved by little children, but many people fear him. They don't like him because he's different. Here he is in Paris, and I'm going quickly because we're almost out of time. This is again a performance along the Seine in Paris. The reaction that the man in gold gets from Parisians is always very different. And lately, it's very difficult to do the performances because we have to avoid the police. Now, because of terrorism, even before the COVID, because of terrorism, it's very hard to do performances outside without getting into trouble with the police. And the performances are always very improvisational, bringing imagination into the pulse of daily life. This is a performance in Cartagena in Colombia. Here's a dialogue in Colombia with a Botero statue. This is what has happened to the costume because the combinaison, the body stocking, the bodysuit was made for the stage of the Paris Opera, not for walking around on the cobblestones or ramparts of buildings and walls. And here is the man in gold. The climax of the book happens in the north of Denmark with these boats. I won't talk about the story. I can talk about it if you have questions, but it's working with Danish artists who makes these huge boats. And here's an image of Jan back in the studio of the Danish artist. There's another image from the book. And Les Aventures de l'Homme en Or, The Adventures of the Man in Gold. He has all these adventures over the world, but it's also a love story. And this is the climax. It's a happy end of a love story. And again, this is Jan's photography based on a performance. This is a statue, not a real woman. And so people shouldn't take it as objectifying the woman. It's actually humanizing and spiritualizing a statue. Again, the power of imagination to make even dead objects come alive. So here is the man in gold, wondering what happened to the philosopher Richard Shusterman, and holding Richard Shusterman's jeans and wondering where he went. And here is a photo that I took of the disappearance of the man in gold. His skin is here, but he is gone. And so that's the end of my PowerPoint. And I hope there is time for questions. Okay, so Xavier, I
Yeah.
and
Yeah, Richard, we are here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can also see you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for this very fruitful conference about Soma aesthetic. Very interesting for everyone, I'm pretty sure. I have a couple of questions, actually. Actually, more than a couple of questions. So I just want to make sure that, if possible, to do quite short answer. The first one is about the concept of Soma aesthetic. We can understand that it works quite well for performer, for artists at large, but to what extent this concept can be applicable, actually, can be operational, actually, for normal citizen or the common people in the street, people in the daily life, people to go to work, people they are not artists or not performer.
Okay, so I think it's clear from what I said, we all are performers in one way or another. The businessman who has to do a presentation is a performer. When you interact with people as a worker, you have to perform as a good colleague. How you stand, how you walk. People, let's say, in terms of learning what food agrees with them, what food doesn't agree with them. Many people in the United States and in Germany, in France, it's also becoming a problem. They have problems of obesity. One of the reasons for that problem is that they're not aware of their eating. You know, they eat and eat and eat until they eat too much. If you're more sensitive to your bodily condition, you can know when to stop eating. You can know also, in terms of alcohol, when to stop drinking. So issues of body awareness are the most everyday necessary knowledge to help us guide not only our personal lives, but also our interaction with others. So I think it's very true for people in business. I mean, it's the same thing about knowing what clothes look good on you. In the Wharton School, which is maybe the most famous business school in the United States, the graduate students, and also I think undergraduates, they have to take a course in fashion. You know, how to dress for business, how to groom for business. So all these different aspects, your soma is the way you are in the world. Everyone is in the world through their bodies. Not everyone needs to be like the man in gold. That's an exceptional thing. But we all need to present ourselves, even on Zoom. right? Even on Zoom, you don't have your whole body. But actually, you told me before that I should rearrange my camera so that you could see more of me. So even in a case like this with Zoom, our bodies are still there.
That's why to you, Soma aesthetic is a heart of living. It's everywhere all the time for everybody.
That's right.
Another one, which is how Soma aesthetic workshops different from different bodily practices such as yoga, dancing, bodybuilding, and so on. How these workshops bring different branches, pragmatic, analytical, and so on together.
Okay, so that's a very good question. So the workshops that I give, it's possible to give a workshop where a lot of yoga is introduced. It's possible to give a workshop where a lot of Zen meditation or Tai Chi is introduced. Aesthetics is very pluralistic. The workshops that the workshops are in body consciousness, and I would say 60% of the exercises that I teach there are based on Feldenkrais method, which is a method that in Paris, there are many practitioners. Actually, there are practitioners all over the world. And there I focus on developing a sharper body consciousness through various exercises of slow movement that are unusual but not difficult, and through body scans. So those are the practical workshops that I give. Now, how those three things are connected is a very interesting question. And in the workshop, they are connected because the workshop includes mini lectures, not lectures like I'm giving now of 40 minutes, but after doing the exercises and sometimes before doing the exercises, I explain a bit the background. That's the analytic. The pragmatic is I show what the method is. I mean, how the principles of doing a body scan. And then the practical is involved in the actual doing. So the practical somaesthetics workshops, and in France, I've never done them for business people. I could do them. I can't do them by Zoom because it actually involves seeing people's whole bodies and sometimes adjusting their movements with hands so that they get the right feel. But in France, I've done it for artists, for dancers and choreographers, and also for anthropologists. But lately, the most people I do them for are people in human-computer interaction design. And again, all those three things come together because I explain what I'm doing in terms of the background. That's the analytic. I explain the method. That's the pragmatic. And then we perform the method, and that's the practice.
Thank you. Maybe the last question, it's a point of clarification, actually. What do you mean by tracing my energy?
Okay, all right. So this is where I have to speak in the name of Jan. So Jan is a very spiritual artist. He believes that people have an aura of energy. And his idea, and that's why he also wanted me to wear the golden suit, is that he thinks the golden suit could magnify the energy because it's gold, maybe because it's different and not so conventional. And so his idea is that every individual has like an aura of energy that comes from the inside and the spirit. And his idea is to trace it. That traces it with the lamp. That's the idea of the lamp, and that is the artwork. So, you know, I'm agnostic about whether people do do have this aura, but the project started with Jan's idea to do the photographs with me. And so I present his idea of tracing the aura. But the man in gold as a performer doesn't depend on whether there is an aura or there isn't an aura. But there is a dimension of energy there, because the performances of the man in gold are never scripted. There's no text, there's no script. We don't plan what the man in gold will do, because we never know when the man in gold will become the man in gold, because it all depends on us being together and being in the mood. Because I don't own the combinaison, I don't own the suit. It belongs to Jan, it belongs to Jan's parents. So the man in gold only exists when Jan and I are together and in the mood for an adventure. And so the energy that's involved in the man in gold is feeling the energy of the place. And I think for business people, it's also very important. If you go into a social gathering, whether it's a boardroom or a company meeting, you need to feel the energy of the place in order to make the best presentation, and in order to convince people, and in order not to say the wrong thing. The man in gold absorbs the energy of the place where he is and acts according to it. He uses the props that he finds. So it's all about creativity through improvisation. And that's why I thought he was important to bring to Imagination Week, because the man in gold is an imaginary character who lives through imagination.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you. That was a great honor and a pleasure to welcome you for Imagination Week. A long time ago, we have decided to invite you. We didn't find the right timing to invite you, but actually, due to the situation, that was exactly the perfect moment. Thank you very much. Of course, all your books are amazingly interesting. If I can say, the one I preferred is The Art of Living, because it's really related to spiritual exercises and how actually you can use in your daily life. This book is probably a major contribution, as well as others. Thank you very much, Richard. It was a pleasure. I hope that we can meet each other again within the next couple of months, if not years. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope to give actually a practical workshop someday in your school.
With pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Bye-bye.